Dr. Brezina, Paul, welcome to Inside Reproductive Health.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I appreciate you making the time to have me on.
I'm interested because I know a little bit about your history of partnership within your practice, and I want to give that as an insight to younger docs. So maybe we start with, how did you choose your practice to begin with? What are the most important factors in choosing, and specifically, what were they for you?
Yeah, so I think that from my perspective, I took an analytical approach, or tried to take an analytical approach to it, and tried to actually get data to help kind of narrow down the focus of where I was looking. So what I did is I actually made like an Excel spreadsheet and punched in all sorts of data for the region that I was looking in, which is pretty broad. It was basically the Southeast. So every major metro center in the Southeast, I made an attractiveness quotient. It would be like the population, the number of docs there, the number of cycles that were being done, the how many major industrial centers were there, how many major Fortune 500 companies were there, um, average annual income, anything I could think of that would make it, you know, give me some data for that. And then go ahead.
You made your own market analysis in doing this. Why?
Right.
Why did? How did you know to do that? Why was that important to you?
Well, I don't know. I guess a long time ago I got an MBA, and so I guess kind of thought that I'd try to apply something that I learned from that. But yeah, so I got a short list of markets that I thought would be likely to benefit from somebody coming out. And then once I got that kind of short list of 4 or 5 cities, which I thought might be markets where you could see a lot of growth um, potential, I went and talked to my faculty members, my advisors, and do you know people in these markets? And pretty much all of them knew people in those markets. And my my mentor for my research, who I'd spent the most time with, knew the principal here pretty well. And so reached out, and they said, yeah, come down for an interview. And that worked out. Um, I I looked at several other cities as well, but I felt that on balance, after coming here for the interview, this made a lot of sense, and I could see it being a really good fit. And so then I just focused on um, developing the relationships here. And so I didn't, I talked to several different people, but as far as like actually, I found a match pretty quickly with that process.
And so it sounds like you had partnership at least in the back of your mind. It sounds like to me it was at the forefront of your mind, because if I were just an associate or wanted to be an associate, I would probably say, okay, who's going to give me the salary and what city's going to have the amenities that I like. But it sounds like you were looking at something a bit longer term with the market. Am I inferring correctly?
Oh
Was
no, I mean
partner?
like my goal going into this was to make one move after fellowship, set it up the way that it needed to be set up, make a mutually beneficial arrangement for the people that were there and for myself and my family, and hopefully come up with a win-win where you could have a transition, so to speak, over time. I think that the model that I pursued is a whole lot easier to pursue in a smaller practice of 2 to 6 people, and I think it's harder to pursue the strategy that I did in a larger group.
Tell me more about that. What do you mean by that? That it's easier
Well,
with a 2 to 6 physician group?
I think there's just fewer people that you have to. But so it was also unique here because they'd never brought on a partner ever. So there had been 3 or 4 people that had come through that were really good people. For whatever reason, though, they had family arrangements or whatever that took them away after being here for a couple of years, and never really got to the partnership conversation. Um, I think my goal was to have the partnership conversation before I even started. So, we had, I think, a pretty well working arrangement for what that looked like in the longer term before I even set foot here. So I think that I, I think that I approached it in a little bit of a different way than people that had come before me. But I think that also, that I was also signaling to the folks here that I had a real commitment to making this work, and that I think it was almost reassuring. I don't want to speak for my other partners, but it would be reassuring for me if somebody was coming to me and saying, "Hey, I'm committed to this. I don't just want to have a stopgap job for a couple of years. Like I'm committed to this. I want to make this work. And how do we make what makes sense for everybody here?"
That profile is what a lot of physicians are looking for, partner physicians are looking for. They want someone to come out with that type of gusto, and you had a plan. But and so you said that they hadn't brought on any partners before, but was it already a two partner group at that point? Was it the two
Yeah,
founding partners?
it was the two founding initial partners, and then there had been a number of people that had come in, stayed for 2 or 3 years and left, come in, stayed for 2 or 3 years and left before me. Um, I coming on 9 years now. I can't believe it's been that long, but 9 years. And then 2 years after I came on, Dr. Bailey, who is a young Dr. Amelia Bailey came on, and I was basically able to, I could, so to speak, sell this product as a, hey, this has really worked well for me. I think this is a good deal for you. And I can honestly tell her that because she was a friend of mine. I wouldn't have told her something that I didn't believe. So
I think I'm going to write an entire article about that particular concept someday, Paul, which is there is a certain amount for the people listening. If you can be the Dr. Brezina in this situation, I think your leverage goes way up. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of groups that are having a hard time bridging the gap because there may be like 2 or 3 original founding partners. They're all within 3 years of retirement, and it is harder to recruit a younger partner at that stage. But if you are that younger partner and you've gotten in and now you're the one that's going to be left in 3 years, and I'm not speaking to your situation, I'm just speaking in general here, but you can do exactly what you just said, which is, okay, now I know other people and I can start to bring them in. I think there's tremendous leverage in that position that you just described.
I mean, I think it's a good thing here, and it's certainly borne out to be, I hope, a mutually beneficial thing for everybody involved in our practice. And we're getting to a point now where we're even looking to expand further, and I think that hopefully the path that we've put this practice down um, is something that has momentum and is stable and good and attractive. I mean, that would be my hope. I think that the market's changed a good bit in the last 10 years too, with the number of practices that have sold at least some of their value, either be it in the lab or the practice, to private equity, and that I think changes I think the landscape's a little different now than it was before. I think that's I think it's always a moving target, right?
Was that on your radar when you were starting this partnership
I mean,
discussion?
yeah, I didn't. And this, I know plenty of people that have done phenomenally well, joining big groups that have, sold some to private equity. So I'm not disparaging that decision in any way. And every person has their own, decision to make in front of it. And there's pros and cons. I think there's a lot of stability having a, stock portfolio, for lack of a better term, in what you have, which is, it's a little more fluid here because it's a private practice. But um, I think that for me, I didn't entertain, talking to anybody that had sold a significant portion of the practice, because I think that they seeds a lot of control, and I think that it also, just I think it's nice to be able to, you know, buy into some of that equity before it sells to some private equity. So I think that, I think that, and that's a big reason why I think we've been a little hesitant to do that. Although, clearly there's some very attractive, partnerships out there in that realm, and it's not a good or bad decision or anything. And who knows where our practice goes in the future, but I do think that I think it would be fair to say that you always have the most flexibility being, being small and nimble, but there's other things that you lose with that. So I think it's more of a personal decision, and I'm not saying to go one way or the other with that.
Now there are definitely pros and cons. There's definitely people that should do it, and I think there's also people that shouldn't. You were starting to see that when when you said 9 years ago when you were
Yeah,
making
so
this.
I've been here 9 years. I was actually negotiating this contract midway through my second year of fellowship. So I mean, the negotiation for this was a full 10 years plus. So
But at the time, are you negotiating partnership or you're negotiating employment agreement with a buy-in option in the agreement?
yeah, right. So what we negotiated was a 3-year period where I was salaried, and then but the terms for actual buy-in and partnership were made at that time.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about those terms, and if you don't want to talk about your specific situation, we can speak a little bit more generally. But I am trying to get specific, at least with what prospective partners and selling partners need to agree on, because I've seen so many darn times, and I mean, more than two hands of associates that were at a practice for 2 or 3 years, and at that 2 or 3 year mark, they went one way and the partners went another way because the partner said, nope, you're not ready to buy in. They said, what the heck are you talking about? Yes, I am. And there was a discrepancy. And whatever that discrepancy was, Paul, it wasn't clear. They weren't going back to something that said, this is exactly what we agreed on.
Right.
The partners had one thing in their mind. The associates had something else in their mind. And so what are these? How specific can we get about what needs to be agreed upon in that agreement, explicit and redundant ad nauseum, so that there aren't any surprises whether we're there or not in 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, I had I think the way ours worked was at the end of 1 year, they had to tell me whether or not we're going to execute the partnership agreement in 2 years, so that it wasn't the sort of thing where I was there for 3 years and then all of a sudden, and this was all, I mean, the guys I dealt with, I was very fortunate because the guys I dealt with were very, very, very reasonable and honest and true to their word. And I don't think that's universally true of all people. So, I mean, I think that I got kind of dumb luck to a certain degree of just being with really good people. But at the end of 1 year, I said, you know me well enough at 1 year, you know whether or not I'm a dud or you don't like me or whatever. So you should be able to tell me if this is on or off at 1 year. So at the end of 1 year, I got a letter saying, no, you're good. At the end of 3 years, you will have the option. In the initial contract, I had a buy-in number and schedule. So that was locked in as a number before I came. And what I tried to say was, I mean, I don't want there to be any, I want everybody to be able to agree on this. And I want to be able to have a clear path for exit when people retire as well. And so I'm not going to get into specific numbers, but basically using practice valuations at the time, we came up with what this looks like over a 10, 15-year period. So it's not like there was a lot of there's intersecting interest in that as I come on and they come out to make sure that it's taken care of. But it was all worked out before I got here.
So is that something that partners and associates need to be agreeing upon? Like, this is the volume that you're expected to do before you can buy in. This is the number of new patients or procedures you're expected to do. These are the outside responsibilities that you might have. You might be in charge of the marketing seat or in charge of the accounting seat or
Right.
some other business function. What are those metrics that should be specified in?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was, I think that the mechanics for partnership, I really wanted very, very clear on the front end. So it wasn't, like colleagues I've talked to where, oh yeah, you can become partner here, give us $30 million. I mean, like, it's just some ridiculous thing. So I think that mechanism was clearly defined. What was not as clearly defined was exactly how good I had to perform to be offered execution of the contract. But I thought that was okay because I had put in there that after 1 year, I know where things are. Um, I've and I know everybody's different, but I know myself, and I knew that I was going to work harder than anybody else anyway. So, like, I never had, like, in my mind, I never had to worry about that. And I knew when we took on Dr. Bailey, she was going to work hard, and I didn't have to worry about that. So, I think we've also been blessed to be in a position where I've never, like during this whole process, we've never dealt with anybody that's not excellent. So I think that it would stress the rubric that we've made if we were dealing with that situation, which, fortunately we haven't. I don't know,
You
but yeah, we
mentioned
didn't have.
you
You had to be board certified. Okay, that was one. You had to get board certification.
you mentioned something that of other physicians that had worked with this group before, and there are perfectly good reasons to leave practices, but
Yep.
I recommend that for current associate docs and for ones that had worked for your prospective practice, this is the person who's going to be joining the practice, to contact both of them, people that are still at the practice and outside. Did you speak with those folks?
I did. I tracked down two of the people that had not that weren't there anymore, and both of them said that it was basically their wives wanted to be in different locations, and that's what was driving the decision. Um, and so, in both cases, they said that the people were stand-up people, that they never felt, that they were misrepresented or mistreated, and they liked the people there and they liked the practice. So, yeah, I did do my due diligence. I hope on that a little bit.
So when you're starting, you're the third partner to join up with the two founding partners, but this is 9 years ago, and then you said you worked for 3 years as an employee, and then so you bought in 6 years ago, presumably. So, but that's still, hey, we've got at least 6 years to work for with each other, and there's probably a couple more on there. And now you're at a point where whether it's not necessarily now, but in the future, there is this age differential between yourself and the two other partners.
Right.
How does succession start?
So, and again, I feel like half of my situation, I chalk up to just, God looking out for me, good luck, not me. But um, we've started to transition, responsibilities, and I take over as much as makes sense. Honestly, I mean, I'm a reasonably independent person, but I really love having the senior partner help me with contracts because he's done it for like 30 years. It's like looking at contracts with him is really, really helpful. We're just getting going on EIVF, and that couldn't imagine a better group of people to be working with either, because they've been fantastic. But going through the contract, looking at all of that, handling some of that negotiation, that's something we're doing right now. Handling interviews for new employees, I'm starting to do more of that. I think that I see it, instead of one person just taking over, what I think makes the most sense is maybe to have two people kind of co administrating for a period of time, and then kind of going from there, because frankly, there's just an awful lot that I learned from each of these interactions that I have with these different responsibilities from the senior folks here, I mean, I don't want to reinvent the wheel and make all, mistakes. And then, like, I'd rather just have them kind of teach me. So it's almost kind of like another mentorship or fellowship or whatever, from my perspective. And I think that the other thing too is that I think it's a little different. And this is just a hunch. This is not something I know for sure, but I think it's probably a little different with, founding partners versus senior partners. And the difference is there that the two guys that made this practice built it from the ground, from nothing. And I think that there's an emotional attachment and a visceral attachment to the practice and the place and the people that started this with them and all of that. It's a little different than just taking over a job for another person. And I think that, whenever you're in a position where you're taking over something like that, just being really mindful of how much emotional attachment people have to the place and how much passion they have for the place. Um, what I've tried to do is allow as much responsibility as people are comfortable with, but knowing that it has to feel right for everybody.
That concept is something I want to explore more, because I think your hunch is correct. It is different when you have founding partners. In this case, we're talking about Dr. Key and Dr. Kute for those listeners that recognize their colleagues. But when you have someone that starts something, passing it on is different from starting anew. And I've never purchased a business. I've only started my own, and that has tremendous challenges. Just starting something from nothing has its own challenges. But one thing that is easy about it is that what I say goes. What this is the thing I started. This is where we're going. This is how we do things. And that would be different if I were to sell this business in 20 years, because of the people that had been involved in it and the client relationships. And if a new visionary were to take over and say, okay, well, now we're going to go with this direction, it's a total, it not maybe a total readjustment of buying, at least a partial readjustment of buying. And so what's that like? Because I think of all the organizations that I've been a part of, most of which are nonprofit charities, but when we pass down from one generation to another, it is hard to adjust and stay relevant. And that is why a lot of businesses, a lot of organizations just don't, because it's harder to change than to be replaced by something that can start anew sometimes. So what is that like? And okay, you have the benefit of the apprenticeship, as you've discussed, but eventually you're going to want to take a direction that is relevant for 2022 as opposed to the year the practice started,
Right.
and you've got to get buy-in. So how does that impact succession?
So yeah, I mean, like I think that that coming on, and I guess another thing that I think maybe mentioning is like my vision for the future, or my goals for the future. I was transparent with on day one. Like when I came down here, this is like 20 years from now, where do you see myself? So, well, okay, 20 years from now, here's the goals that I want to have kind of implemented. I want to have A, B, C, D, and a lot of that was also trying to grow the practice. And I think we've even done that while I've been here with bringing on Dr. Bailey, because we've never had 4 practitioners here before, and we're wanting to go further with that, and that's great. I think that the fact that they were amenable to bringing on another person 2 years after hiring me speaks a lot to their kind of like incorporation of my goals and meshing them with their own. And I think that that's not. I don't think that's a given. I think that was a conscious decision by them to try to merge both of our kind of visions for the future. And so I think that again, I think that I got really lucky with people that actually cared what I said, and like, tried to incorporate that into what the plan was for the future. Um, I think what's going on is we're both kind of blending our visions together, and the things that I think are really valuable for their vision of how things have been done. I've modified the way I see things, for those things. And for things that they think that, hey, maybe this is makes sense or whatever, they've modified their things. So kind of instead of I guess, and even the succession plan, in my head it was always like, okay, somebody's going to retire, then I'm going to take over. And while that may be true in the like global long-term 20-year sense. I think what what's functionally happening is more of a we're merging together, and then one person's going to drop off at their own comfort level, and I'll take up what comes up at that time. And I think that in that way, nobody has this jarring like realignment of all of their goals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that to accomplish that, you have to have communication, you have to have mutual respect. You can't have, and you really can't have a situation where you have somebody that's just autocratic and dictatorship and what it has to be more collaborative than that. So that's just the way that, and I don't think that like we sat down and said this is the way it's going to be. It's just the way it's organically kind of evolved. And again, going back to kind of the smaller practice, I think that that's a lot easier with 4 actors versus 30. And Dr. Bailey being on, me and her meet every Wednesday, talk about everything, make sure that we're doing everything in a way that we're all comfortable with. So there's an incredible amount of communication that we put into all this, or that I try to put into all this, to make sure that everybody feels they're represented, everybody's concerns are being addressed, and everybody feels like we're going in the same direction and pulling on the same side of the rope.
It sounds like you got lucky in the fact that you're doing this with that it was a little less explicit in the beginning. You had the global vision in your mind, but then ends up being a longer term merger and diversion. And I encourage people to stress this, to stress test this succession plan, at least somewhat. And I can give you an example. I was making an introduction between a younger REI who may want to go into independent practice for themselves, and with a group that is probably looking to retire within the next few years. And I know both of these parties very well, both wonderful people. And as they're talking, I just wanted to start to stress test some of the places where they might diverge in this time period, whenever, whether it's 2 years or 5, where the incoming party starts to make the decisions. And I wanted to pick out things that I knew would be deliberately controversial, and the retiring party, let's call them, has an individual that works for them that is just the sweetest person, an administrative person that is the sweetest person. And let's call this person Dorothy for the sake of this conversation. I said, okay, we're in 2 years and Dr. A wants to fire Dorothy. Dr. B, you've had Dorothy for X years. How do you feel about this? And so they actually talked through that kind of stuff a little bit. So I do recommend stress testing the succession plan to the extent that you can think of examples that are important to you. And it sounds like you had at least what was important to you. You knew what vision you wanted to take.
I think that just comparing the way things have worked out for me versus the way they've worked out for other people that I've known that were my year, I think that a major stress that we didn't have was a lot of the negotiation about how the ownership of the practice and all of that looks in the long term. I think having that worked out on the front end is hard to overstate, because I think that allows everybody to be comfortable on the front end. And it also is a time where fellows coming out, I mean, I think you have your most leverage really, really coming during the negotiation part at the beginning, because once you're there and you've already moved your family and you have like a house and all that, it's harder to move. And I think that I would encourage people to be very deliberate and intentional about, what the expectations are in the long run before you move there. And I think that really, if somebody like say we're looking at a new partner, I want them to have a clear expectation on the front end too, because I want people to be here the long term. I'm like, everybody's different. I mean, I know of practices that, basically they're there to squeeze what they can out of people for 2 or 3 years and then have them leave, and then that's it. And I think that, if that works for them, great, but that's certainly not what I would want taking on somebody. I would want somebody that's going to be there for 30 years. So I think that it's in the best interest of people looking looking at positions to try to get as much clarity as they can on the front end, because I don't think that's the norm. At least that's not what I see.
I believe that about marriage too. But that principle that you just discussed, we call prolonging investment in the deal. And so if you invest too much in the deal up front, you're more likely to make poor decisions because of sunk cost. And so what Dr. Brezina is talking about is if you put this off and then you said, well, you know what? Yeah, we could talk about that later. And I'm just going to buy my house here and we're going to enroll our kids in this school here. And now we're packing up the U-Haul. There's a lot of sunk costs, and it is hard to go back from at that. The more you invest, if you're putting off these bigger discussions for later. So to the extent that you have them up front and repeat them as you're starting to invest before you start to invest emotionally, the more likely someone is going to make the correct decision. And I can't stress that enough either.
I think also it was really important, I think, looking back at the course of the last, hindsight's always easier than prospectively, but I think that, we made a conscious decision coming out to buy a inexpensive home, used cars, take on as little debt as humanly possible. And I think that really made things less stressful going for the whole buy-in and whatever. And frankly made me feel more that if things didn't work out, it would be easier. It's just less investment on the front end, which for me worked out well and made me and my wife feel more comfortable, I think, in the long run. But everybody's different with that. I do think it's different if you go out and you buy a $1 million house and a $100,000 car and all this other stuff, and then I feel like you've lost a little bit of your own personal leverage, in the future if people do decide to be dishonest and not follow up on what they're saying they're going to do and things like that. So I think that coming out and being, enjoy yourself, but not being overextended, I think is important.
I'm trying to think of what Jack Bogle calls this, but it's anytime someone has it's something like waterfall of money, and it's not just winning the lottery. It can be if you get an inheritance or you get a raise, you get a new job, your income spikes at one point. And I think for a lot of people that made 55 grand in residency and then
Right.
and not much more in fellowship and
Right.
all of that medical student debt, and now finally, after all that 15 years of debt / low salary, there's all right, it's car time, it's house time. And I think your wisdom is very poignant of not so fast, Kemosabe.
Well, I just think you're leveraging, you're leveraging a little bit of your security and ability to be flexible. I mean, we bought a house for $90 a square foot. We still live in it.
Yeah, and you're in Tennessee, so you might be familiar.
It's a little easier in Tennessee.
You might also be familiar with Dave Ramsey. That's my kind of of financial planning as well. So we talked about how to do the succession plan, Paul. When do we start doing it?
I guess it depends. So I think of it as kind of like two. Or I think it's borne out to be in my experience anyway, and I think this is different for other people, but there's two different things. There's one is the practice ownership, how salary is divided. Are we just splitting everything up as one person fades out, or are we keeping it pro rata? Are we doing some sort of mix of it? So I think there's the financial side of it that's kind of one thing, and then I think there's the decision making part of it that's another. And I think that, for us, the financial part of it was reasonably clearly defined on the front end, a roadmap to that, and not just my buy-in, but also how it works when the senior people decide to step back and not work as much. So I think that having that on the front end kind of being defined that's just been a huge stress relief just on our personal relationships, because it's just one thing that's not something that we have to hash out again, like everybody agreed on it. I think that as far as I think that the who makes final decisions and everything, it's a little harder, because I think there's the functionality of people that are really good at what they do that are running the practice. There's also an emotional, like we said, attachment where it, like you said, with the person, the Dorothy person, you know, they feel. I think people that started the practice with Dorothy would feel that they kind of almost feel like they got to protect Dorothy, and and it's kind of it'd be like saying you're going to fire one of somebody's kid. Like, no, that's my kid. You're not going to fire. There's a emotional bond to these people, which is it makes it great because people really care about the practice too. But I think that that part of it I think is harder, and I think it's probably I think the only way that that really works is to have people when they're ready start to cede control. And I think the only way that happens is if people have confidence and trust and faith that the people that they're passing it off to, because this is their baby, it's going to be looking out for the best interest and not just their personal interest for the practice as a whole. I think that people have to the senior folks have to believe that they're not handing the people that have built this with them over to the wolves, and they're going to be taken care of.
And that would be, I guess, addressed as this succession plan is unfolding. You've given so much to prospective listeners, and I say if there's 150 fellows out there, at least a third of them listen to this show at one point or another, and anyone that is listening to the show has a huge advantage from all of the partners that have been on who are telling what's important to them, what they went through. I mean, you've basically given someone at least a little bit of coaching if they're interested in coming to Memphis and being a partner, that you've given them some insight of what's important to you and how they can approach you. But let's expand that coaching a little bit further. How would you coach someone on coming to you if they're in fellowship right now, let's say their second year, and they've just started peeking around, they've maybe gotten like a call from a network or something or a friend, but they're starting to make this decision. What would you recommend that they do if they were approaching you?
Well, I think that the first thing that I would do looking around is, everybody's got their own list of, I think, priorities for them, and you could probably tell from the way that I approached this that it was, at least on the front end, driven a good bit by, I want the math to be behind me to where I'm relevant wherever I go. So I think that, and that was something that, my wife and I think I'm also just incredibly blessed to have like the best wife like in the universe. Like, so, we've known each other since college. We've done everything together growing up and everything. And so we really approached this collaboratively. When I found a place that I wanted to approach, they said, "Oh, we'll fly you out." I said, "Not without my wife. Like, there's no point. Like, you're wasting your time." So I think that, and I don't think it really matters if people are, if it's husband or wife. I think that everybody has to be on board for wherever you consider to move, right? So for Dr. Bailey, it was really important that her husband, who's incredibly talented finance guy, found something here too. And so, to make sure that both parties can find something in where you're going. So I think that unless you and your spouse are both on the same page, I wouldn't really entertain going someplace. Now that said, up until I went to fellowship in Baltimore, I'd never been out of North Carolina. I thought I'd explode if I left North Carolina. All our families in North Carolina, my wife's family's in North Carolina. I'd done everything in North Carolina. And before I went to fellowship, I would have, done anything to get back to North Carolina because that's the only place that I really could ever see myself. I think that expanding that a little bit was healthy for us. Now it's not healthy for everybody, but it was healthy for us. And you know, I think being drivable is important. Um, I don't know if there's a huge difference in 5 hours away versus 10 hours away. I mean, we were 5 hours away from our home in Baltimore, and we're 10 hours away here, but the frequency of visits and everything doesn't seem to matter that much. I mean, you get up at 6 and you're there by, mid-afternoon. It's not that, it hasn't been functionally that big of a deal. But I think that being driving distance from family is important. I think that being with people that you think you're going to know and trust is important. And I think being in a market where you're going to be relevant is important. I mean, like, if you go to a place, I mean, there's a lot of major metro centers. I'm not going to name one, but I mean, we all know of metro centers that are frankly overpopulated with REs. And I think that to go into a market where you're going to be, I think, a little bit more relevant on the front end while you're building a practice, I think that has some value. I think that has some worth. From everybody's looking at different things, but for people that are valuing the idea of a practice that hasn't been bought by private equity, at least partly, or whatever, I think that has some worth too for some people. I think that basically people should look for opportunities that are beneficial in the long run. I don't like looking for opportunities that are quick return, but kind of stagnant. I think that just my personality has never been to do that. So yeah, I think that I think that you would, first and foremost, talk to your spouse. And I talked to my spouse. I didn't really talk to my family. So my family was like, no, you need to come back to North
Yeah. Yeah.
Carolina. I'm being serious. So
I know, but I know the distinction that you're making right now.
So I think that your spouse is your partner. That's who you talk to, and that's who you really make these decisions with. And I think that if you and your spouse are doing things together and you're all kind of on the same page with what your goals are, I think that that's what makes this work, right? It doesn't work if somebody's like, hey, unilaterally, I think this. I don't. Does that answer? I kind of beat around the bush. I'm sorry, but
well, I had started the question with just coaching for you of how to how someone approaches you. Like, I coach people on how to apply for a job at Fertility Bridge. Like, if you want to get my attention, you have to follow up. You have to research I'll never hire anybody that does. So I sort of coach people in that. But I also think that's really sound advice that can absolutely derail even the best arrangement that you have professionally. Right. If it doesn't work out for the person that you've agreed to spend the rest of your life with, that's gonna be a wrench. And so I think that's a really solid piece of advice. So in conclusion, would you want to conclude with some coaching of how you would recommend, this is how you get Dr. Brezina's attention if you're interested in possibly becoming a partner with us, getting a job with us?
For us, I mean, just call me on my cell phone. My cell phone number is 901-846-5880.
Do you really want us to put that in the podcast?
That's fine. I give it to plenty of folks. That's fine. I'm a pretty open guy, so I'm happy with that. My email is Brezina, that's my last name, md@gmail. And just drop me a line. I think that for some folks, I think that if you had, so for me in my practice, like, we'll do our own vetting. If you feel comfortable contacting me, I'm comfortable with you contacting me. And then we'll call your fellowship director and make sure that everything's okay. And I mean, we'll do that too. But I think that folks need to, I think, just open dialogue and honesty. I think the one thing that I just can't tolerate from really anybody, friends or otherwise, is just being dishonest, right? So, I mean, I think that people have to be open, they have to be honest, and they have to be transparent. And I think that if people, contact us with, hey, here are what our goals are, we'll tell you, hey, we can or can't do that or whatever. I I think that there's a lot of, if people are thinking about contacting other practices, especially if they're, um, not advertising and things like that, I think doing what I did, finding people that know people is a great door. So, I said, I wrote Dr. Kuta and I said, hey, Dr. X told me that you were a great practice. You know, would you have any interest in starting a dialogue? So it wasn't just from zero. I think that some people really respond, I think, maybe better to that and they feel more comfortable with that. I think that really, though, I just look at it as, I'm a person, we're bringing on somebody else that's going to be a partner, they're a person. We have mutual respect for folks and we want to build something together. And if that's a vision that people want to explore, then let's explore it.
Thank you so much for your transparency on the show. I'm going to have our producer take out the number and email in the show notes. Caitlin, don't put that in the show notes because I don't want Russian bots penalizing Dr. Brezina for his transparency. Just reference in the show notes that he says it in the podcast. So if somebody's reading it, they're going to have to listen to the show to get it. But that's cool. Tremendously transparent. I hope that it results in a few conversations, and I know that it will be helpful for a lot of younger doctors listening. Dr. Paul Brezina, thanks so much for coming on Inside Reproductive Health.
Hey, Griffin, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you making the time for me.